And drones are just a tool, and they're a remote sensing tool, and albeit a very good one. We think the number one misconception in the drone industry right now is how fast it will grow and which sectors will grow and which ones will lag.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 80. What did we learn about the drone industry in 2016? For that question, we turn to Colin Snow, CEO and founder of Skylogic Research, a research, content, and advisory services firm in Redwood City, California. His firm provides research-based insights on commercial drone markets. And in this episode, Colin shares some of the findings of the firm's analysis from 2016. He talks about current trends, and he shares some things we should look for in 2017. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Colin to introduce himself.
My name's Colin Snow, and I'm the CEO and founder of Skylogic Research, otherwise known as Drone Analyst.
Colin, I'm glad we were able to connect. It's been about a year since we last did an industry update. In your opinion, what was 2016 like for the drone industry?
Well, it was a really good year. So much happened, and I'm sure your listeners know probably the most exciting thing that we think has happened is that we now finally have, in the U.S. at least, a regulation in place. That's Part 107. And the good news kind of was that they're not as onerous as they could have been. So we now have the basis for an industry and a firm base to grow on.
If there was one word to describe the industry in 2016, what would that be?
I usually shy away from sound bites because they never really communicate complete concepts. But, kind of the one word that comes to my mind about the commercial drone industry is certainty. And whereas, for the past 10 years, business has operated with uncertainty about the regulations around the commercial use of drones, we now have in 2016 with Part 107 a real clear set of rules and a roadmap for further regulations. And, I'm just echoing, I think, what so many economists and CEOs say in general about markets, and that's when companies are uncertain about the future, that is about things like pending regulation and taxes and customer demand, et cetera, they tend to hold off on investment and markets languish, but that's completely changed this year. So we see now more companies from the Global 2000 and Fortune 500 companies coming forward with testing and integration of drones and operations of data, and we've heard those testimonies at the drone shows this year.
You routinely look at the industry, so could you tell us what research you undertook this year?
Well, we did several pieces of research. We did one major research and 4 minor studies this year. I'll start with the 4 minor studies. The 4 minor studies we did looked into the commercial drone sectors. So we did a 4-part series called The Truth About Drones in X, and X being the industry. So there was one report on agriculture, another one on construction and infrastructure inspection, another on public safety and first responder operations, and another one on mapping and survey. And each report, there was kind of details of use cases and an overview of the opportunities and challenge in that particular sector, and then a look at what's next. And then we did a whole section 2 on the competitive or traditional approaches and what kind of incumbent technologies those verticals may experience when looking at drones, or service providers when they want to go in and offer a service to those particular use cases. Those reports are free and your listeners can access them. They're under the research tab of my website. In case they don't have that, it's droneanalyst.com.
Can you tell us about those studies and what you learned?
Well, in each of them, we look at in depth into each particular vertical, and we look at, especially in the challenges and opportunities. So in construction and inspection, we looked at the life cycle of buildings. So we looked at everything from the planning to the actual construction to the maintenance of a particular site or building, and then the tear down of that building. So we looked at the entire life cycle and looked at how drones are providing value. And, in that one in particular, it dives into looking at things into the design where construction firms or architectural firms have figured out that they can do things with building information management, which is take the data from a drone and use it in their design process to help better visualize how a construction or a building face would look like. And then in the actual building phase, we saw use cases and we talked to companies that were using them to monitor sites and monitor the progress and make sure that they didn't have problems in sequencing. And then during the maintenance phase, we hear a lot about that, about anything from inspection, where you need to go and inspect a roof, or you need to go inspect a face for anything, maybe some thermal leakage and that type of thing. And then we were seeing drones even in the deconstruction phase, where people were looking at how they would map out a site and get access when they're tearing down a building. So that's an example of what the type of depth and scope that these papers go into.
Any new trends or developments that might be interesting to follow?
Well, yeah, I think at the building information management was probably the most interesting thing. We've known about drones in agriculture for a while, and we know the use cases around NDVI, and we know about public safety and first responders and what they're doing and how they have been using drones in other countries and in the U.S. And we know about mapping and surveying. We know about, the automation of mapping and surveying. But I think the interesting thing was in construction and infrastructure inspection, we found that many of the capabilities of drones all converged into one set of uses. So a particular construction site would use just about everything. They'd use the mapping part of what a drones can do. They'd use the survey and volumetric part of what drones can do and the software can do. They looked at, like I said, the building information management and architecture piece of it. So kind of the surprising thing was the complexity and breadth of drone use in that particular vertical. What I didn't talk about, though, and I'd like to talk about, is the major study that we did this past year, which was called Drones in the Channel 2016 Market Report. And this was a really big piece of research. This was 3 months. It was sponsored by BZ Media. That's the company that runs InterDrone. And it examined drone sales in the distribution channels in North America. And it was the first sort of in-depth comprehensive study of drone sales. And the study incorporated both quantitative and qualitative research. And I'll explain that. So qualitative research came from things that are interviews that we did with the major manufacturers like DJI and 3D Robotics and SenseFly and Parrot and Autel and Unique and FreeFly Systems. And as well, we interviewed major distributors where we got some really good insights into what major brands they were distributing, the growing role of distribution and reseller businesses that plays in both the sale of consumer and commercial drones. The quantitative part of it, the study, was really a precision online survey of drone buyers. And from this, we were able to get some very interesting data. For example, we got a clear sense of the U.S. market size of all drones and got a good growth projection by segment. So the cost of the drone, the commercial activity, we got a sense of the brand market share. We got a sense of the reseller outfits and the role that they play in the minds of the buying public. We got an extensive look at the big box store penetration, so what they carry and how many SKUs and what brands they carry. And then, like I said, we looked at the drone distributors, but we got good data on who they are, what they carry, how many major customers they have, how many customers by industry segment. And so, we got so much data from that, plus we got data on who and where are people buying their drones. Are they buying it online? Are they buying it in a store? And then what's their intended use? Are they using it for hobby? Are they using it for racing? Are they using it for photography? Or are they using it for their employer? And then we got data on what matters most to the purchaser. Is it the price? Is it the availability of accessories? And then we got a really good sense of, what are the most popular drone brands by price point.
Sounds like you looked at several factors in that study. What were 2 to 3 things that really caught your attention?
Yeah, there were. There were lots of really key insights, but there were probably 2 that popped up and stand out in my mind as 2 that are worth highlighting at least, is that we found that most drones that cost over $2,000 are purchased for professional use. And then the other key insight we got was we really got a clear sense of what DJI's true market share is, at least in North America. And it's about 50%, not 70%, as most popularly described in the press. So, as I mentioned, part of the study was an online survey, and we gathered quite a few responses. We got about 780 drone buyers. So the results had a really high confidence level. And as I said, we found that the majority of the people who buy drones do so for either hobby or professional work. But of that, interestingly, about 52% of the people who purchase drones at whatever price point it is, do so for photo or video taking, either for hobby or commercial purposes. But where it gets really interesting is when you drill down into that, in our analysis, we found that about 75% of drones costing more than $2,000, they're bought for professional use, as I said. So this includes operations for public entities such as federal and local governments and police departments, universities, and then the standard civilian operations, which we call commercial and private industry operators. So the survey also found that across all brands and all price points, this is the second key insight, is that DJI's market share in North America is 50%. The devil, of course, is in the detail. As we looked into the detailed price points, we found that DJI's share is both higher and lower. So, for example, we found that in the $3,000 to $7,500 price range, DJI's market share is about 67%. But then when you look under $1,000, it's about 21% or lower. So lots of keen statistics about who's buying, what are the most popular brands. And, there were lots of other insights, but those are the two that kind of stick out in my mind.
Is that survey available for anyone to download and read?
It is. It's a comprehensive survey. It is available for purchase. I think the single user license is around $500, and it's really not an expensive piece of research. I mean, some of the research people can buy goes anywhere from $3,000 to $20,000. We don't price our research that way. We want to make it accessible to most people. So the other four that I mentioned are free, and they're available on the website. Same page. It's droneanalyst.com/research. And this one's available on that page also. But of course, it's a much more comprehensive study.
Who do you think would be most interested in the study? Who was it directed to?
Wow. Well, it's anybody who wants to get into the business and understand either as a manufacturer or as a buyer or as a service provider, because it tells you what is happening in the industry, both in the channel as far as retailers go and as far as what users want. So it was kind of divided. So it's retail focused and just distribution focused. But then on the other hand, it's also user focused. So you get a sense of what people want in a drone, what they want to use it for. So in that regards, it's probably mostly geared towards the manufacturers and distributors. But then if you are a service provider and you want to get a keen understanding of maybe some of the best places to put your efforts, it's a good study for that.
A year ago when we spoke, you mentioned the primary reason for people buying a drone was for videography. Has that changed in the past year?
Still the number one market driver is people buying drones for videography. And that came out in this, like I said, this user survey that I just did. When we looked at it either for hobby or for commercial, video and photo came out still as the number one market where people wanted to use it for professional work. And normally, as I think I mentioned this the last time I was on, that agriculture tends to be the one that people gravitate to because so many benefits that aerial imagery can provide farmers, and people make a quick connection and think that that's where they're going to see the most activity for drones, when in fact it may not be. We still see film, photo, and video as the largest market. We see infrastructure inspection as number 2, and we say surveying and mapping as number 3. And still agriculture accounted for only like 6 or 7% of what our users told us, or what users and buyers said they wanted to use drones for. So not that there isn't benefits, and not that we aren't going to see growth. We just think it's going to be more organic in agriculture than in other industries.
Was there anything in 2016 that surprised you?
Not much. I'm sorry. I think it came exactly the way we thought it would. And that's that the industries that we thought were going to do well, when our survey going back all the way to 2014, we still think those are the ones that are going to get the most traction. I think, though, one of the things, and I wouldn't call this a surprise, I think I'd call it a disappointment, is that the industry visionaries continue to overhype some of the future capabilities of drones. And we think, in particular, that people underestimate incumbent technology like manned aircraft and satellites. As you know, personally, drones aren't going to feed the world or transform industries or change the world. Penicillin changed the world. The moving assembly line changed industry. And drones are just a tool, and they're a remote sensing tool. And albeit a very good one, we think the number one misconception in the drone industry right now is how fast it will grow and which sectors will grow and which ones will lag. I think I mentioned this maybe in the last show, is that I wrote about a year ago a post called Diversity and Hype in the Commercial Drone Market Forecasts. And this year in the Small Unmanned Systems Business Expo in San Francisco, and then at Drone World Expo in San Jose, I gave a presentation that sort of echoed that same theme. And it's this, that not a week goes by that I still don't see a new industry pundit giving a forecast on drones that hits my radar. I'm currently tracking 50 independent agencies that make predictions on the size and growth of the commercial drone market. 50. And the thing about it that's amazing to me, Randy, is that in each of these, in one way or another, of course, they deliver growth projections for the industry that are just phenomenal. And all the graphs go up. But we question whether they're really accounting for everything. Did these people really account for a 3D robotics bust this year? Did they forecast that? And where are those firms? I never see them at the shows. I've only seen 2 analysts beside myself at these shows in the past 4 years. And it just boggles my mind. How can these firms possibly know what's going on in the industry if they're not at the drone shows and they're not following the vendors and they're not talking to users and buyers and service providers? And, honestly, I read all of these reports. It's something that my firm is built around. It was to try to bring some focus and to de-hype the industry as much as I can. But frankly, some of these are just made up numbers. And the sad part, nobody questions them. Everybody puts posts on LinkedIn and sends tweets about them. And we see figures of, $127 billion, and everybody thinks it's awesome and it's going to be huge. And it's almost like they're affirming their own aspirations. The problem comes when people make major financial decisions based on these forecasts. And my recent poster child for this is my most recent one, because I just wrote a post on this, is AeroVironment's new ag drone, which is great to have a mobile device controller, which is one of the drivers we saw for 2016. And it's great. They figured that out, that, it's great to not use a PC to program your drone. It's, mobile devices is now the way to go. But we believe that their entry into the agriculture market is very, very risky. They're kind of arriving late to the party. And, we've written about this a lot. This particular sector, at least in the U.S., is already set. The established relationships between the farmer and the agronomist and the dealer and distributors is very, very set. It doesn't mean that farmers aren't going to go out and buy drones. And people always come back to me after I make these kind of statements and they go, well, we know farmers are buying drones. Yes, they are. They're going to buy them and they're going to use them. And we're probably going to use, like most of them, they're going to buy a DJI ship and they're going to run Drone Deploy or their favorite data service, and they'll get some value out of it. We just don't see that uptick happening very rapidly. So here's what's odd to me, and this is why I talked about it so much this year, is that, for 3 or 4 years now, everyone has wanted to pursue precision agriculture, thinking that that's where the big money was. And this was all squarely based on an economic forecast done by AUVSI, that's the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, and because they said it would be the largest market segment. But back when that report came out, we did a deep dive into ag and said, this thing's really fraught with adoption issues. And all those issues still exist, like the adoption of variable rate technology. So you can buy a drone and you can take a picture of your field. And if you're thinking that you're going to use your NDVI image to spray your field less, you would have to have a piece of variable rate technology, like a variable rate applicator, to spray it. Well, the adoption of variable rate technology for farming isn't as large as what people think it is. It's maybe 20% of farmers, at least in the Midwest, have variable rate applicators, and maybe only 12 to 13% actually use them. So you can have great imagery and you can use drones to do some very advanced things, but to be able to actually practically use that information requires that you have other technology. So that technology has to be adopted at a greater rate, we believe, for drones to really show their value. And I said all this to say is that when these studies come out for these big forecasts, like the one that came out from Goldman Sachs and said that, construction is going to be huge. It's going to be the largest industry that's going to adopt drones. And everybody scurries off and then focuses on that. My question is, well, what's going to happen when you find out that there's issues there too? There is problems. So the first use cases we're seeing in construction are fraught with problems also. It has everything to do with, access, and it has to do with the integration of workflow. It has to do with the ecosystem of software that they have to use to actually use the data. And, people in use cases have found benefits, but widespread adoption isn't going to go gangbusters overnight. So this is why we try to help people understand and come to a more realistic sense of where the industries are going to grow, and not to run after these huge market forecasts and keep pushing big numbers around thinking that everything is going to change overnight. We see growth as more organic, and we see it happening at more of a steady pace than all of a sudden a hockey stick.
You know, with so much hype, I wonder if there are some people who might have rushed to be the first into a market or to establish themselves, only to find out that they're also the first to experience the stresses that you just talked about. Are you seeing any evidence of this?
Yes, and firms have been reporting that for a while. So you see companies like Digital Harvest and maybe a few others and a few experts like Rory Paul, they're reporting that, right? They've been in this industry a long time, and they've gone through the phases. And, you know, those people don't show up at the drone shows as much as we'd like to see them. We even had a long conversation with Ray Hunt of the USDA, that's the U.S. Department of Agriculture, talking about how drones are adopted. And we think that the first firms that went in did experience a lot of agita. And, we've even seen that with Measure. We heard from Measure at the latest show that, you know, they went in and did an ROI study, looked at the return on investment that a drone could provide, and they came up with a calculator. And, you know, they really tried to make a lot of inroads into agriculture. And they've since moved on to other areas. They recognized that market was just very difficult to do. So, yeah, the firms that went in there early have experienced some agita, but others have begun to focus in other areas.
Some people listening to this podcast might wonder how you've gained so much insight into the drone market. How long have you been looking at the drone industry?
Well, we started in 2012. We started looking and doing research back in 2012, and we did, again, it was bottom-up research. It was research that we did to ask users and buyers about what they were looking to do. So we did strategic assessments, we did market research, online surveys. So again, we started back in 2012, and most of what we see today really hasn't changed from what we've seen back then. We understood from the buyers and the users and service providers where they were going to put their efforts and where they saw the most traction. So that's where we started. And then we continue to layer on each time a new bit of research and try to go out to a new set of users and see if anything has changed.
What I found really interesting this year was the rise of autonomy and deep learning systems, like Intel's RealSense technology. What was your take on that type of technology, and where might that drive the industry?
Yeah, that was one of the drivers we saw in 2016. We definitely thought back earlier in the year that was where we were going to see growth, and especially autonomous systems. And you mentioned a few. I would mention also with Intel and RealSense and their acquisition of Movidius. And, you know, that area of sensor development is something where we thought was going to be a large technology driver, and we're seeing some interesting things. So, you know, back in July, we saw a startup out of Kansas called Aerotenna take home the first prize at the NASA UTM Drone Sense and Avoid Tech Competition. So just for your listeners who don't know, UTM stands for the Unmanned Aircraft System Traffic Management System, which NASA is facilitating to develop. And they had a conference back in July, and they did this sort of test or bake-off. And it turns out Aerotenna had some incredible new technology. So beyond what we're seeing in RealSense and some of the deep learning or vision positioning systems, their technology is microwave sensor, so miniature microwave. So it's basically a miniature radar that's coupled with an active sensing autopilot, and it scans its surroundings during flight, and it avoids potential collisions autonomously. And so by combining that microwave-based sensing with some aerospace control engineering, they're really solving some of the challenges that need to be solved for flying autonomously beyond the visual line of sight. So that's what they're doing. That was one that was, you know, just sort of came in our radar in the middle of summer. So the rest of them were headlines, right?
What are some of the other developments shaping the market?
Well, we named several of them, and one was this move towards fidelity. We talked about fidelity last year as being one of the drivers, and that's really where people are looking to gain a better resolution from a sensor. So image resolution, so things like 4K video recording, now that's sort of the standard. zero latency 1080p downlinks. You see DJI just came out with that. HD video monitoring. That's largely been driven by the consumer. So we have more and more on sale, 4K television sets and HD tablets, and high resolution smartphones. So the expectation is the drone's going to have that or better. And then, the third industry, besides the sensors and fidelity, one of the things we saw was going to be a driver this past year was mobility. Since consumers and enterprises have this expectation for operating with the portability of mobile devices. So those were sort of three things that we saw in regards to what was driving the market in 2016.
Can you talk a little more about the mobility factor?
Yeah, so the expectation is that people want to be decoupled from their PC and operate the drone, so do everything from planning a mission, that is mapping out an area where I'm going to fly, or even pre-planning a visual for my video that I'm taking. They want to do that on a mobile device. And they want that mobile device to be directly connected to the drone itself. So once I do my planning or my pre-planning or my mission planning or I log my flight or I buy insurance, no matter what I'm doing, right? There's more apps this year that came out on mobile devices for drones. And so that's what we see was driving the market, was this shift from the consumer to want to be able to operate and control through the smart device or through the mobile device. So that's where we see everybody putting their effort. Case in point is what Drone Deploy did by expanding their offering and layering in some of the capabilities from AirMap or from Skyward.io or from other places where people want to log their flights. So we see that trend. We actually see that trend continuing in 2017.
What do you think of the small personal selfie drones, like the Breeze and the Mavic, for example?
So, I'm a personal flyer myself and a hobbyist flyer. So I follow that very closely. And I look at how people use those for commercial work mainly. But it's interesting what happened in the market as we studied the channel in mid-year and then later in the year. And it's interesting, as one panelist said, Drone World Expo, when you compare DJI and Unique and GoPro and those new drones, he said, let's just put a fork in it. DJI is the clear winner in the drone world with the features, functions, and fidelity. And there's plenty of people out there who have written stuff and tests, and I read the same thing, what people write about these drones, and I don't repeat it. But I think there's two things about what recent announcements from DJI had on the rest of the market. And the two releases, of course, were the Mavic Pro and the Phantom 4 Pro. They sucked all the air out of the room. The other brands, including even higher-end drones, just went into a dead zone for months while people banked on pre-ordering those drones. And sort of the second thing we see coming out of this is that, unless a miracle happens, DJI is going to capture the major market share for the drones and film industry. They're not there yet because directors, they have their favorite cameras. They have, it's either an ARRI or a RED, but just based on spec alone for the new Inspire 2, which has got an X5S 5.2K gimbal camera with SynCore 2.0 processing and processing that supports Cinema DNG and ProRes. It just might shift demand in their favor. We actually look at this and we're quite surprised at what they came out with. The sensors are great. The dynamic range is great, at least in specs. I mean, this will all be worked out in the market. We'll see what actually comes. But the first preliminary tests I see from people is quite impressive. So, it'll be interesting to me to see what happens this year and the reaction of filmmakers and camera operators at NAB show this year. So we'll see what happens.
With so many new drones coming out on the market, now almost every year, there's a lot of pressure for consumers to upgrade. Did your survey find any evidence of a ceiling where people would decide to hold off on an upgrade?
No, but that's a great question. We didn't ask that question. But what we did see was how people reacted, especially people who follow film cameras, so either prosumer cameras, etc. And we think the foldable drone, right? DJI wasn't the first with a foldable drone, not even for commercial use. One of the first foldable drones we saw, of course, was from Lockheed Martin. It was their Indigo, which I thought, and I wrote about this 2.5-3 years ago, it's a brilliant piece of technology, and they got it right. And I was wondering when anybody else would get this, that a foldable drone is what allows the portability of it. And they always say, when you talk to the camera experts and not people in the drone industry, these are the pundits who review, Nikon and Canon cameras and Sony cameras. They say, the best camera is the camera that you have with you. And we think this has created this huge shift now. Now that all of a sudden DJI has got a foldable drone, people are waking up to the fact, hey, this thing's portable, and it is the drone that I can bring with me. You know, it's funny. I'll give you my personal story on this. I took a vacation. I went down to Cabo San Lucas, and I didn't bring my drone with me because it just was, I was going to bring, I thought, well, gosh, I'll bring my Phantom 4 with me. But it was just one more thing. It was a big sort of pack. And I have the backpack, and I thought, well, I'm going to have to check in extra luggage. And, I got to make sure that the batteries are with me on the plane, and I can't put them in the belly of the plane. And you have to go through all this stuff and I thought, well, no, I'll just leave it behind. And when I go away on vacations like this, I go away to film. I'm an underwater photographer, so I go away in underwater, do a lot of underwater photography. I do a street level photography, and I make videos, and I just do that. That's kind of a fun hobby that I do, and I'd love to take my drone with me when I go on these vacations. But when I travel by plane, it's just a little bit of a hassle. And, surprisingly, when I got on the plane back home to come home, I saw 3 people on my flight with Phantom 4 styrofoam cases. They had actually brought them down there. So I talked to them and asked them, hey, were you down? Were you filming? Where'd you film? And, what'd you film? And, yeah, I brought it with me. And this was before the Mavic was introduced. So I'm just curious to see, you won't see people with it on the plane anymore. It'll be in their backpack. It'll be in their carry-on luggage. You won't know that they've got a drone with it. It was clearly visible for me to see that people were carrying their drones with them. And using them and taking them on vacation. And I'm not saying that's the use of, what people are going to use a Mavic for, but it was an interesting phenomenon that people do want to carry them with them. I think the thing that's going to happen this year in the commercial world will be around the Mavic Pro. The folks at Drone Deploy have already written about this. Mike, the CEO, has said, the Mavic Pro is probably going to be one of the most popular drones, especially at construction sites, because it's about the access that you have. You just don't have a lot of room to bring up a drone, but something that small, you can carry it with you on site. You can unfold it. It does everything the current Phantom 4 does. So, it's good enough for the work that most people will do. So we think that trend towards a foldable drone will have a big impact in both the consumer world, but also in the commercial world.
How about drone racing? Do you track that as part of your research?
I don't track it as research, but I do watch it on ESPN, and I love it. I read posts and forums, and I follow them from time to time, but it's not a market that I particularly follow. But when I do, I love to, and I talk to the racers when I see them either at the drone shows or, elsewhere. I love the hack innovations. I love the things that they're doing with ESCs and low latency video transmission. And they're always looking for the better next piece of technology. And my hope is that we'll see a trickle down from, as we do kind of from Formula One racing down into manufactured cars, that the major vendors, and especially DJI, will start paying attention to what they see in drone racing and begin to adopt that technology into the larger, wider prosumer and commercial market.
What should we look for in 2017 in the drone industry?
I think I mentioned Aerotenna, and as one company that we got our eye on. We're hoping that their technology will make its way into some of the mainstream commercial manufacturers. And of course, the other is Intel, what they're doing with so many areas, not just with their purchase of Ascending Technologies and their RealSense, but also what they're going to be doing in the entertainment world. If you look at their website, they've released a drone that is targeting just particularly that. So we've seen the Drone 100 shows, and we hear about Disney using drones to create fireworks types effects. We think that's something that we'll see more of in 2017. But I think one of the things, and here's one of the developments I think people should look for, that started this year, was a shift in investor sentiment. And this goes back to the conversation we had around hype. In 2015, things were looking really good. We saw VCs and other firms that had funded about $450 million in 74 deals. But then when we started looking at the data in 2016, it didn't look as rosy. So we're now more than 3/4 into the year, and we see only about half. So we see $230 million in 31 deals. And we're concerned that this might be a trend for 2017. And it's basically this, that investors, they're sort of beginning to vote with their wallet. And, the message may be, dear John, I found somebody else. certainly the investors, at least the investors I talked to, they're kind of wising up, and they're finding that revenue is just not easily attained in the drone industry, and it's not growing as much as, and going back to the forecast thing, it's not growing as fast as these forecasts said it would. Plus, like I said, the crash of 3DR, people have a little more cautious outlook after a $100 million loss. So when we look at 2017, though, we're optimistic. Make sure that doesn't get miscommunicated. We're very optimistic about the industry. Here's my thoughts. My thoughts are what's going to mostly happen in the commercial space. And one of the things I heard from talking with businesses, either the companies that are in the Global 2000 or the Fortune 500, we'll see them begin to scale operations. So for most of 2015 and 2016, they were doing use cases and they were testing. And what we expect in this year, in 2017, the year to come, some of them will begin to stand up full-time operations. And all of that will not be because drones are cool. It's because it's economically driven. So this will be economically driven modeling. And there'll be standards in place. And so they'll stand up full-time operations. Some of them will outsource, yes, but some of them already have aeronautical or aerial services departments. And so we see that they'll begin to focus more on drones. The other thing that's really we're looking forward to in the new year is the new rule from the FAA on flights over people. So perhaps by the first of the year, that's what we heard in the shows from the FAA, that there'll be a notice of proposed rulemaking. And somehow it'll be 3 tiers of operations. That wasn't real clear, but that's sort of what we're hearing. We think that we'll see more work on software-defined airspace. So the NASA UTM, it's still 2 to 3 years out before we see recommendations from them given to the FAA. And again, that's not a rule for flying beyond visual line of sight. That's just some recommendations about what they think it will take to do more controlled flights and have it integrated with the traffic management system. We think we'll see more drone connectivity, like connected cars. So we'll see some work in 4G and 5G, like the work that's being done now with Nokia. But it's not one size fits all. So we'll hear, there'll be headlines, of course, but there'll be people working more and more on that to look at how drones can both be operated over the 4G and 5G network and then how they can stream data. I think we'll see more live news gathering from drones as more stations adopt programs or even rent drones out, like was done by the major networks in Cleveland at the Republican National Convention. That was Measure, who was their contractor. So we actually see things, we think things are good for companies like Measure, who provide drones as a service. Cell site inspections, we'll see more of that. There's 150,000 cell sites that need inspection every year, more than once a year. We think that because of Part 107, we'll see an uptick in public safety and first responders. We've always seen that as a lagging market. We don't think there'll be a huge uptick, but we'll see just more organic growth as those companies begin to figure out what program to put in place. And gosh, there's, a lot of it. There's, 20,000 cities in the U.S. So we see that as a good thing. On the flip side of that is we're going to see more state and local laws that restrict drone operations. This is the unfortunate part about what never really got clearly communicated by the FAA was the thing that's called federal preemption, which means that, the FAA has the preemptive authority over the airspace and it's not local states or cities. But with 50 states and 20,000 cities, it's hard for the drone industry to chase every bill or every proposal that comes across small communities. So we think that can put a stranglehold on growth. So we don't feel like we're out of the woods yet with a huge uptick because this is a squasher. Finally, we think there's, a bit of uncertainty in the air with the election of a new president and a new transportation secretary, and we'll see how that pans out. But in the drone world, we think that, we'll see further development of some pretty positive things like drone service providers beginning to hook up. So the Internet of Services, not the Internet of Drones that are connected and, operating in swarms, but we'll see the Internet of Services where people are hooking up with larger firms who are going out and being able to get enterprise customers and then standing up a set of standards that you can follow. And if you want to provide and be a drone service provider, you can hook into those firms or those pieces of software. So there's a piece of software out there at a company that's been doing this for a while called Dronify. It's called DRONIFI. And what they do is they provide a basically a franchise for you to be able to stand up a business. And they do all the front end and the back end, but it's invisible to the customer. So underneath the hood, it's their software that does the stitching. It's their software that does the promotion and has a page out there and does the data services afterward and then actually delivers it to the customer. But it looks like you're doing it. And then, as I mentioned, measure. We think that drones as a service, it'll be a good year for drones as a service.
And as we wrap up, Colin, what's the message for drone operators as we enter the new year?
Well, to the operators themselves, we think that they should do all the standard stuff they should be doing. And there are plenty of webinars out there on, getting a Part 107 pilot's license and, putting in place a set of standards and that type of thing. But for most of the operators, there's a lot of new people coming in. And I'd recommend personally that they specialize and find a niche. So they get training, they get certified, but beyond that, assess which market or markets and use cases you think will provide you the best chance of success. And that may be the industry that you're currently already in and you know the most about. Just because you know how to fly a drone doesn't mean you know about the particular industry that you're going to serve. So, but if you are, and you want to expand your skills and your skill set, then we think it's to create this differentiated set of value-added services. You should gain some skills. And I've written about this, and I wrote about it maybe 6 months or 9 months ago. It's a piece called The 5 Skills You Need to Succeed in the Commercial Drone Market. And that's on my website. It's free. It's under my blog post. But I still think that advice still applies today. So the 5 services I mentioned for the drone operators and companies they consider as part of their commercial drone business are video production and mapping and photogrammetry and LiDAR and spectral imaging. And there's a catch to each of them, and that's detailed in that post because there's a certain skill set you need for video production. It sounds like, anybody can just, you'd think that everybody can just go up and throw a drone up and punch the record button, and that means you're doing video production. It's actually a lot of post-production work that you need to learn how to do. And then there's mapping. There's a lot of skills that you need to learn around mapping. Photogrammetry, you need to know what that is. There are actually certification agencies for photogrammetry like ASPRS, and then, advanced people, if you want to get into LiDAR. LiDAR is a very complex image scanning technique, but, it is a specialized area, and it is something you could learn how to do. And then spectral imaging, which is sort of this thing that's normally associated with precision agriculture, that's a more detailed skill set. And we caution people that, again, if you're considering ag, you really should be well established in the agriculture market already. But there are skills that if you are, you really should know about, and spectral imaging is one of them.
That's it for episode 80 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Colin Snow and gaining some insights into the drone industry for 2016 and 2017. I want to thank Colin for sharing his insights and expertise. If you want more information or want to connect with Colin, check out the website at droneanalyst.com. There you can download the free industry reports that Colin mentioned in this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a positive review on iTunes. It really does help. And as always, I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.